was in a parking lot, and the swarm went to the fuselage of his bike. And he called and said, "Can you come get it?" I said, "Sure." Sounds like an easy one.
Cool.
And so it's like hanging on his bike, a lot like this on the bird bath. And I just brushed all the bees off, and they kept flying back to his fuselage. And it turned out the queen got underneath that cover, and I couldn't get her. And by the time my third swipe or two, I figured out the queen was up under his, and he wouldn't let me take the bike apart to get it. And by then there was a film crew from the local news. And I had already made the decision, the only thing I could do is kill these bees. So I got to kill bees on my local TV. And the beekeepers then would let me let it down, because of course, the best video they have is when the instant I killed all the bees with soap and water, so not good.
So what did you put on this again?
Soap and water. It's environmentally friendly. It's the only thing he was going to let me put on his bike. 1 cup of liquid dish detergent per gallon of water in a sprayer. Now I like to keep that in my car or truck when I catch the swarms for one big reason. We've all, beekeepers who've done this, you've probably caught swarms before, and you don't want to leave the hive there overnight until it's dark. That's the best thing to do, and then you come back and get all the bees out of there. You sometimes, if it's 50 miles from your home, you catch the swarm and you want to go. Well, if you do that, you always leave, what, 200 or 300 bees? Yeah, a handful wherever they were landing, because there's a pheromone on the queen that attracts them there, and there's always a few stubborn ones that will stick to that spot. If you leave those 300 bees, they get mean, and they will start stinging, and those people that called you to get the swarm off their bird bath are going to be calling you back saying these bees are stinging everything in the backyard. So I always, if I'm going to take a swarm in the daytime, I let the bees settle down and get stuck on there, and then I kill that last bit, just to keep it from happening. Because I don't want to drive 50 miles back.
What's the tallest tree you ever got about it?
Well, I one time went up 45 feet, but I won't do that again.
Well, I got one out this spring, 25 feet. I used a 55-gallon plastic barrel on a pole.
That's the way to go. Yeah.
Went up a ladder a little ways.
Yep. I've done that
They all went
too.
in them barrels.
I had one on, this was on the Starkville campus this year. It was about 25 feet up, but it was a big swarm, and I really wanted it, but there was no way for me to get to it. It was on it was an embankment. There was no way to put a ladder up. So I just did the old thing. I threw my hive tool with a rope over it, and I tied a comb to it and pulled it up. I let most of the bees get on that, and I gently lowered that because I knew it probably had the queen. And then I threw it back up again and just shook it hard, and they all fell down. I put the queen in the box below, and they fell that 25 feet, and I got them. So you can be creative. You can't always climb a tree. Okay, so beekeepers are pretty good at making bees from bees. The way you got a nook is because a beekeeper had a fast-growing colony, and he made a split. And he made a split to sell to you. Some beekeepers make splits to increase the number of colonies they have. That's why people like Richard 80 brings 50,000 colonies to Woodville, Mississippi every March. He's going to split those 50,000 to make 90,000 colonies to put on trucks to go to South Dakota to make honey. South Dakota is one of our best honey producing states in the U.S. So he's taking advantage of the climate of Mississippi to grow his bees, make splits, which is simply just what it sounds like. You're creating 2 colonies from one, or 3 colonies from one. And what you do when you make a split is you move honey and brood into new units. And the only way you can do that is what? If you've got what available? Queens. Each colony has to have a queen. So the guys who make splits either buy a lot of queens, most of them make their own queens. So that's why people are interested in how to raise queens. So we're probably going to offer a little short course on queen rearing this next year. So I'll leave it at that. This is just one way to make a split. This guy is actually going to move bees with brood and food over into a nook, and he's probably going to sell that to somebody like you for $125. So how do you feed these bees once you get them? I don't like this kind of feeder. This is an entrance feeder. It's fine, but in cold weather, here's the problem with it. On a cold evening, the bees are where? They're in the center of that hive box, clustered together, and they're not going to get to that food. They're going to stay away from the entrance. So if they store a lot of food, that's okay. But if they need this food, they can't get to it on a cold night with that kind of entrance feeder. Now, we don't get that cold down here, so it's probably okay. This is a division board feeder, and this is a type of one. This one is thin. I like this because it is thin. It's only like a half gallon. But notice it's open at the top. And the idea is it's supposed to have little grooves for the footing for the bees to grab, so they don't drown. They drown. And these black ones are the same way, but they finally got wise. Anybody use this form of the black feeder? It's my first year. I like them. The only thing is the hive beetles like them too.
I don't have ours don't have the wood at the top.
Okay, well, see, I use the ones without wood on the top, and you drown bees unless you put sticks and stuff in there to float.
Put a
Now,
piece
what
of
they've
styrofoam
done-
in there for a flotation device.
Yeah, I used to put straw and things like that in there. What they've done now is, it's a little more expensive, but I do like them, is they have this insert.
The ladders.
Yeah, basically keeps the bees from drowning. The bees can crawl down in here and eat the fluid back. So as they drink, the fluid level drops, but they can't drown. They're able to grab a hold of this. And the reason they put the rubber bands on, when you fill this full of syrup, it will sag like that, and the bees will go in and drown. So that's why you have to have the little rubber bands to keep it from opening. But it keeps them from drowning. So I like this one. There are all kinds of feeders out there. This is called a division board feeder. It sets in your colony like a frame, like a comb. This is the way I traditionally fed bees growing up, and up until a couple of years ago, this is how I fed it, with gravity feeders, pails. These pails are anywhere from a gallon to 2.5 gallons, depending on what you buy, and it takes advantage of it. I didn't bring an inner cover, doggone it, but this is an inner cover. It's a thin division board that you put at the top of a colony, and you don't see it, but there's an oval hole at the top of that cover. And that pail has some holes in the lid that lets it drip out slowly. So the idea is you put this bucket on over this hole. Some beekeepers do it this way. I don't do it that way. Why? Anybody try it this way? What I mean this way is exposed. Raccoons, man, they are so good about knocking those off and drinking your syrup and getting to your bees. So what I like to do when I use this kind of feeder, I put an empty rim above it and a lid to keep animals from getting to it. It also prevents robbing. When bees start to steal honey from one another, it's because they can get to little spaces like that and steal honey. So this, if you protect that bucket with a lid, it prevents robbing too. This is a real cheap homemade feeder. It's a Ziploc bag. Fill it up 2/3 full of sugar water, lay it on your top bars, and then take an X-Acto knife or a box cutter and score it across the top. Just a little bit. You don't have to gash it. Just a tiny hole or two, and they will actually eat the syrup, and you can just throw the bag away. So that's another way. I do not like this kind of feeding. Now, some people do. This is a feeding station, exposed station. This can trigger robbing, where you put food out in the open in an apiary or near an apiary, and the bees come get the food. This works best if you're going to do it if you put the feeding station near a landmark, like a big barn or a silo that's at least 200 yards away from the colonies, because the bees identify the food with the landmark, not with the colonies. If you get it too close to the apiary, they start to identify it with the colony next door, and they start picking on one another. It's called robbing when they do that. They will actually steal from one another and kill one another when that gets started. And they will sting the heck out of you when you go into the yard. Robbing's no fun. Anybody ever had a mass robbing event?
Yesterday.
No fun, huh?
Yesterday, one of the biggest highs.
Oh, yeah? You can have pounds of dead bees in a day really quick in front of your colonies when they start stealing from one another. Did you intervene in any way? One thing you can try to do is...
I didn't try to cover it or close it off. I just let it alone.
Yeah, I often, it depends on where I am, I will stuff pine straw in the entrances of everybody, shut everybody down. They can't come out. And by the time they get the pine straw out, it'll take them half a day to get that out. Things will settle down. The guy I used to work for was pretty crude. He used used to carry a sprayer around with diesel in it.
Oh,
And whenever we put colonies back together, he sprayed every joint with diesel as a repellent. It worked, but not very environmental friendly way of doing things. But so the best thing I think is just don't let robbing get started. You may have to move bees, especially if your neighbor's dog gets stung or their kids. When I first saw these in the journal, I thought, I love them now. Because, yeah, they do. And two people, what's nice about these things are, I forgot what they're called, but they actually lock into the handles. And it gives you great leverage. It's at your hips, and two people can move a heavy colony pretty easily. Whenever you move bees, be sure they're strapped. You don't want things falling apart. And if you're going to move long distances, like I bought some colonies this year, you want moving screens on top. And the entrances are going to be screened too. You need, in this climate, in this heat, if you try and move a sealed colony and it's jostling down the road, it stresses them, they generate energy, they will overheat and die. So be sure and allow the heat to vent out. Now, I don't just have mine exposed to the sun. What I do is I have the screen on there, and then I put a lid on top of that as a shade board to keep the sun from baking them. And it gets plenty of ventilation while I'm driving the 100 miles down the road or whatever. Robbing, we just talked about it. Sometimes you got to do something in the fall or late summer when robbing is a problem. This is more for researchers. This is a trick you can use. You can actually put yourself inside of a screen while you work your bees. And the trick you take advantage of, the bees in here will fly up and out of that cage. While you're working, they learn to do that. Robbers tend to come in here when they can't figure out how to get in. So it buys you some time. It's an idea. We use it a lot at the Baton Rouge Bee Lab. And the best advice in beekeeping is to find somebody that knows a little bit about it. Find a mentor. These clubs are a great place for it. There are how many beekeepers in this room? 30? And there's probably 70 opinions. Yeah. That's one thing about beekeeping. There's really no right or wrong way. There is, but there's so many ways of doing the same thing. You know, find something that works. And a lot of times people here do it one way, I do it another, but it works for both of us. So, you know, it's just find somebody who's competent. This is just some more advice. Don't get crazy. You're not going to raise queens in your second year, okay? That's going to be years down the road. You're not going to pollinate almonds, I'm sorry. You're not going to do it in your third year. Just keep bees alive. Learn to do that. I know it sounds silly, but there's a lot to learn to keep them alive anymore. We have so many more problems than when I was a kid. And that's really true. That's why so many people, I don't know how many families were in this state back in even, let's say, the 80s. In Alabama, there were probably 50 beekeeping families that were commercial and made a big living doing it. I can only think of one or two now. That's how hard beekeeping's become. So on a commercial level, it's really diminishing. But what's interesting is, with all the news notoriety of bees, there's hundreds of people wanting to have a few colonies in their yard. Every workshop, Auburn had a workshop that had 500 people this spring. We had 150 people at Jackson in March. People really want to get into bees. So that's kind of cool. But you're not going to, likely, anybody here make a living on bees? Some of you make an income though, huh? Yeah. But it's kind of like, it's not your major.
That's what I put in it.
Yeah, well, that's good. I think beekeeping's a lot like owning a
But I'm
boat.
having to cut costs and everything else. I mean, you
Yeah.
build a lot of your own farm, your equipment and stuff.
Well, that's the thing about a hobbyist is a lot of my hobbies are just throwing money away, and beekeeping's one of those. No. I really feel for people that have to make a commercial living at it. It's tough. It really is. Yeah, sometimes you go into bee journals and they say, here's a beginner's outfit, has everything you need, and they give you a lot of stuff you don't need. So my advice is don't buy that. Talk to beekeepers and buy just what you need because it's expensive enough. You don't need anything extra. Okay, so I've just told you got to feed these bees to draw the comb, but you can overfeed them. You go, darn. Well, how do I know? Well, I was at a guy's house Thursday. He's like, my colonies are getting small. I keep feeding them. And I looked in there, and the queen had no place to lay. Every place she could lay was full of syrup. I said, man, you're overfeeding them. there was no place for the queen to lay. So you got to kind of know when to stop. So you can overfeed. Now, we always say, this is one of those things the books say, don't allow swarming. You know, it depends on what your goal is. Is your goal to make 400 pounds of honey per colony in your backyard? If so, don't allow swarming. If you just want enough honey for you and your family, believe it or not, you can allow swarming and still get honey. So it depends on your philosophy. Now, I personally, because I learned beekeeping, I just think of swarming as evil, but it's not. It's normal. It's natural. It's bees. What swarming is, it's a colony that's gotten crowded and congested in the home it's in, and it either that home needs to grow, give more space, or they have to go find a new home. And so when they go, what they do is the old queen will leave with about 2/3 of the bees to look for a new home. Before they leave, they make preparations for a new queen. So you know, 2 colonies for 1.